You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
A few years ago, Karl Lagerfeld turned the Chanel runway into a giant data center at Paris Fashion Week. Mainframes everywhere, colorful wires, runway models dressed as robots. Either he was making fun of how technology was part of our lives, or he was really giving us that wink-wink of the future of fashion is in data. Once upon a time, you had a bunch of people making gut decisions about what the general public would wear in the next 6 months. Today, new data-driven platforms are informing the buying and product decisions. Department stores are increasingly using data to help predict the rise and decline of future trends. Fashion houses are using data analytics to identify opportunities and weaknesses in their collections. So one side you have creative vision. The other side you have trend tracking and analytics. Data, luxury, left brain, right brain. Big question is, can they all live together in harmony? Well, here to help to sort all things out is Elizabeth Shobert, VP of Marketing at Digital Strategy at StyleSage. If you're not familiar with StyleSage, it's an analytics platform that helps fashion retailers and brands track global movements in pricing, assortment, promotions, and trends. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So how did that sound? It sounded like it's the end of the world. It's the end of the fashion world. What's going on here? You have data, you have fashion, you have gut, sort of a gut reaction, and that's really what it's always been about. How can the two live together in perfect harmony? You have Beauty and the Beast. So I thought you would be the perfect person to help our audience and everybody sort of sort things out on that. So a good place to start at, I talked a little bit about StyleSage. Why don't, tell me about StyleSage, tell the audience about StyleSage, why it was founded, the types of clients you work with, and why they come to you, that type of thing.
Sure. So our CEO was actually inspired by a very classic business school case, the S01. I'm sure if many of you have been to business school, you know exactly which one I'm talking about. But in it talks a lot about how quickly the organization can actually bring a product to market, in a matter of weeks versus the rest of the industry, which is typically months and months, sometimes even, a year or so. And so she was really inspired by this idea. How could other brands be as reactive and responsive as Zara is? And part of that is the information, what kind of data do they have at their fingertips? And, she realized when she pulled some people in the industry that a lot of people were using these really outdated spreadsheets to make decisions, and it was impossible to keep it updated. So out of that was kind of birthed StyleSage. And what we are is essentially we're pulling in a lot of different data sources, e-commerce data, what's online today, influencer data, looking at what people are searching for. And we're bringing this all together under one solution so that merchandisers, people that are in design and planning can actually see what's happening in the world outside their door. So I think that's been one of the challenges in the luxury industry is to kind of look more outside in the business context, understand where the shifts are happening in the consumer marketplace. And we're really trying to empower people to use data in their decision making on a day-to-day basis.
So was that difficult at first for Jade to pitch that idea? Did she approach the retailers? Did she approach the fashion houses? Who was the first to sort of embrace that idea? Who were the trendsetters, if you will, in data when she first started?
So I know she was sitting in Paris at the time when she was kind of working out the plan for the business.
Isn't it always that way?
Right. I know, I wish. So she was talking to some of the luxury brands, and I think there was definitely some sort of reticence or pushback about it. But, that was 6 years ago. A lot has changed. And, we know well, just being in this industry, how much has changed, and that, some folks in the luxury industry have been slow to adopt some of these technologies. But fast forward 6 years and, the reality is in front of us. The marketplace and the consumer has changed so much. Yeah. You either, try to stay ahead or you're going to get left behind.
So are they starting to wonder if there's such thing as a fashion data scientist?
We have a few actually.
Talking about a fashion data side is on your client side.
You are seeing more of them. You see it a lot with some of these like larger marketplaces, a lot of these companies that are working with multiple brands. You're definitely seeing more of that. I still think it's kind of in its early stages, but it's definitely a growing sort of specialty within data science.
Right. So give us a typical example of how StyleSage works with a client,
Sure.
like starting from the very beginning where perhaps you identify a need and then going into a client and how do you sell them the idea of data?
Yeah, I think one of the big things for us is understanding that they need to be able to make faster decisions. I'll probably talk about speed 100 times during this podcast, but speed is really critical to these retails surviving and thriving in this environment. So that's really kind of one of the major talking points, but it's also about how can you blend the creative side with the data? And I think it's really interesting. I just read this Gucci case study in Business of Fashion about how their creative director works with the merchant team. And I think it's really clever. It's instead of just having it coming from one direction, there's much more of a collaborative approach. So that's understanding that, yes, what sold really well. You understand some of the shifts that are happening amongst the consumer, like what they bought last year, what they might be interested in now. But how do you kind of bring those two, the creative, together with that data and come up with something new that has your brand sort of stamp and sort of ethos surrounding it?
Who usually leads the conversations in those meetings? Is it more of the data person or the creative person, or you really do need some sort of visionary on the client side who can facilitate the two together and see the bigger picture?
I think for us, we found that success is really when there's a kind of a wide variety of stakeholders in the room. And that's going to come from the merchant. There'll be folks that are in consumer insights there. There'll be the e-commerce teams. You'll have some of your digital folks as well. So there's going to be a broad sort of swath of people. And I think that's, for any kind of technology, honestly, I think that's really important for it to kind of take root and grow within the organization and get that really important traction.
So give us a typical example of how they would use the data.
Sure.
Like a great, you don't have to name any clients if you want to, that's fine. But, how do you see the best use case scenario that have you seen since you've been working there?
Sure. So to kind of back up one step. So when I talked about us having e-commerce data, what we're actually doing using image recognition technology, actually able to pull out really granular details around what that picture is on the website, whether it's a flowered shirt, long sleeves, button up. It can pull all those details in. And so if you kind of fast forward to the use case, the way that they can see opportunities in the marketplace is they can actually drill down to really specific colors and look at specific prints, see if they might be missing something in a sort of certain price bucket. Maybe they're introducing things too late. So they're actually able to look both in the present moment, but also look historically and see what they might have missed in the past, and then kind of evolve it for the future seasons.
So basically what they're doing is they're sort of scraping, if you will, or mining the internet for a lot of these looks and colors. But who's to say that they're on trend or they're sort of predicting the right thing? Or did StyleSage look at other things outside of fashion when it comes to color trends and other things like that more of the cultural changes that are happening and include that as well? So there is some context to what's coming from the data.
Sure. So as we've evolved our solution, we've definitely had a lot of questions around that, and we've actually been bringing in more influencer data, and those influencers can cover everything from beauty to health and wellness to those in the home and interior space. So we're understanding how they're talking about things, where are they located, understanding there might be some geographic trends that they should be pinpointing. We're also looking at how people are searching for trends, what might be related to something. If I'm looking for a particular type of jacket for winter, there are other searches that are be related to that. So we're trying to dig more into sort of the origins of that customer demand and in the language in which they're searching for it, so we can understand some of the nuance and help some of the marketers as well make decisions.
So is social listening involved in that? You
to some degree, yeah.
You were looking at influencers. So is there, like I'm saying, is it basically what they're posting on Instagram and what the responses are from their followers, things like that?
Yeah, so we're pulling in posts from Instagram going back years and years, and you can track and see, what some of the popular hashtags have been, who they're tagging in their post, looking at some of the different, brands they might be working with as well. So we're pulling in that data as well, understanding that, that's a really important channel to understand sort of engagement with a brand or with an influencer.
So the way, I'm wondering if 5 years from now, hopefully this won't displace any jobs in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
You'll still need somebody there to from a creative standpoint to sort of put everything together.
Sure.
But it's really fascinating. It's, right on your website, it says, data and fashion can be friends. Is that your tagline? And
I did come up with that. Thank you.
So I love it. And but the fashion industry and the luxury industry, has been really notoriously slow to adopt to emerging technologies. So can they be best friends, BFFs? If you will. It's, you're starting to see more of that happening, but, very curious to see if 5 years from now, everybody will play nice and you'll actually have a better product.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to step back, in terms of technology and data out there, there's so many different types available for retail and then more specifically for fashion and luxury. So, whether you're thinking about fit technology that helps people to find the right size, or the sort of the AI chatbot that helps people to answer questions about a product, it's all of those things. They need to somehow be measurable in their impact. And I think that to the extent that, data can be friends with fashion, I think it has to have some like ROI when you use these technologies. And I really like how brands like LVMH are thinking about technologies can kind of impact that customer journey. They're really thinking about, discovery, what things can help here. And then when we get people in the store, clienteling, understanding to have the right inventory in the store. There's a lot of different elements here, but I think, from where I sit in the industry, it's about, again, making faster decisions, but understanding that world outside of, sort of outside your brand. And then how do you connect with that shopper? I think those are sort of the three really important areas. And some of maybe not necessarily quicker wins, but they can be, something that a brand can really understand and connect back to some of their key metrics.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at a lot of the digital first brands, Stitch Fix is one, but there's a lot of digital first brands that are really on the forefront of data collection and insights analytics. So how can traditional companies compete on that level? They were born that way, these digital first companies where analytics and data was really in the forefront. And so the luxury brands have to catch up and compete. And what are the advantages that they actually have, these traditional luxury brands have over the digital first brands when it comes to data and the customer?
Yeah, so for a luxury brand, its heritage it's really its essence, and it's constantly trying to kind of balance that with the sense of newness. But at the same time, like any other brand or retailer out there, they are beholden to their shareholders, and if that's relevant, growth by channel, engagement. So I think that these are just as important for a luxury brand. I think where there's some element they might have a leg up is really when it comes to personalization. I think there's kind of an inherent element of personal to some of these luxury brands. It's just really how do they capitalize on it. And at the end of the day, I see data in its, analytics and its current sort of life as something that empowers decisions. It doesn't, take the job of someone. It helps them, give them a lens with which to make a decision with, to see and just make maybe more of take a risk that they might not have been able to. So I think it's just really about having the people inside these organizations that can interpret and understand what this data means. Because, if you're not kind of versed in that, you do sort of need someone to kind of explain it and understand it. But I think once you kind of unlock the power of it, it's incredible.
Yeah, and I think you also need a CEO, the leader of the company to make that a mandate.
For sure.
And I don't know if you're seeing in terms of leadership, you're seeing especially some of the larger brands. I know LVMH is one of them, but there are a lot of luxury brands where you just have to listen to their earnings calls, the ones that are in public, and data is usually right entrenched in the conversation from the CEO or one of the senior executive teams.
Yeah.
And I think we'll continue to see that.
I think too that one of the things that I talk about a lot when it comes to whether it's our solution or other solutions, it's you really have to have that sort of senior level stakeholders and ownership, at that level. And I think that also just the ability, like once you have that information in your hands, and those people, you have to empower them to take those decisions. I don't think every organization is built like that. And I think that's why you have companies like Zara, while not luxury, they can make those decisions quickly because they've empowered their people to do exactly that.
Right. Are you finding the fast fashion brands, are they started getting more involved in data to get it out even faster and finding out what the trends are? I mean, that's really moving quickly to see what's next, and things change really quickly. Are you finding they're more involved in the data?
Yes, I think because, they're selling a lot of products, across many, many different markets. They're always kind of looking for the next opportunity. So for us, that's a very obvious use case and target market. So yes, they're definitely, I think, well-versed in the need for this type of data.
Yeah, it's interesting that, some really say that the future success of luxury brands will, be increasingly determined by their ability to collect, analyze, and generate insights from customer data and turn them into actionable strategies. It's nice to collect those data, but you need the people to understand, to filter that out, to surface the insights and actually take action on them, which has always been a problem, but not only in the luxury industry, but across industries, is finding out what that means. What are the implications of the data? Like I said, how to bring those insights out. And I find a lot of companies that I've worked with in the past, they have the insights, but they don't have the leadership when they feel that some of those insights show that they have to change and they have to do things differently. So again, do you think the future of success of a lot of these luxury brands will actually be to make some changes and do things perhaps they're not comfortable with, and getting into uncomfortable spaces that, but in the long term they might grow?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes down to leadership and really trusting your people to make the right decision. And that's all about the people. But, kind of coming back to the tools that you were talking about, I really think that, the consumer insight, I know most of these companies have someone who's kind of looking at where the market is going, but I also think it's important to see who your customer might not be. Where is that opportunity? And I think seems as though maybe some labels have been blindsided by these massive tectonic shifts that are going on, especially in the luxury industry. If you think about how millennials or Gen Z want to sort of access luxury goods, resale, rental, experiential retail is huge, but they maybe want to discover the brand online. And then on top of that, the whole definition of luxury is even changing, where it's maybe still is a status handbag, but there's health and wellness, there's these culinary and travel experiences. So I think that, kind of taking a step back and understanding maybe not your customer today, but tomorrow, how are you going to access and sort of build that loyalty over time? Maybe you're going to first access them through a resale market, but then maybe they're going to, what's the opportunity for you as a brand to access them in, your full retail channels? So
is that something that StyleSage does, is where, find out where their potential customers are, ones perhaps that the client has not tapped into? Is that something StyleSage works with clients? We
typically are looking at the opportunity more at the sort of product level, and less so. A lot of times our data is actually paired with insights around the consumer. We've seen that kind of side by side in a lot of reports.
Their consumer insights or your consumer insights?
Their consumer insights, yeah, because I think they really go hand in hand. But it's very interesting to kind of understand, yes, today, this is my customer, but what about tomorrow? So I think I always like to take a step back when people are talking about who my customer is. I'm like, yes, but who is it going to be? And like you said, how are you going to address those shifting needs?
Right. It's interesting. I was reading something from WGSN, that trend forecasting company. I think I actually wrote down this quote here because I thought it was interesting. Data is exceptionally useful to detect when a rising trend is about to hit mass adoption and to anticipate the decline of a trend. But what it can't do is invent a trend. Do you agree with that?
I'm kind of thinking about the phrase invent a trend. I don't think data invents a trend. I think that it is a trail of breadcrumbs that may kind of be very sparse at first, and then it sort of takes you somewhere else. I think that if you're kind of looking at the broader market, that's true, that it'll tell you when things are going to hit kind of mass adoption. But if you're very laser focused, I think, on where you're looking for those sort of early signs, whether that's a geographic market or a certain sort of groups of thought leaders, influencers. I think if you're more focused on that, you can actually pick up on that sort of trail of breadcrumbs earlier. So I don't think that data invents a trend, but maybe I'm just getting caught up in it. Don't worry.
You're too involved in it. So if you were, let's assume our audience here are luxury marketers, and they really haven't played too much in the data space. Like, what advice would you give them to, like, I know, don't say StyleSage, because I know you're going to say that. Like, let's be neutral here. So just from a broader perspective, what would you tell them to do? Where would they start? Or if they're just starting out now, what are some of the areas that they should really be looking at and to get the most out of the data? And obviously, they're going to have to hire people to do some of these things. But where the best use of the data then, to grow the brand?
Yeah,
and market their clothing.
I kind of start thinking about, like, what are the companies sort of, what's in their targets for that year, or what are their plans for several years out? And I think to the extent that you can connect certain tools that help you give like a measurable lift in awareness or conversion rates, whatever those might be, I think if you could connect a solution to a lift in that is going to be really important. So, if it's awareness, what are you thinking about in terms of, your social media presence? How are you approaching personalization? There's a lot of different ways you can think about it. So I think it really is going to depend, and this is not a cop-out, but
right.
Just depending on what that company's priorities are. If you're accessing a new geographic market, it could be very different.
Right.
What is your Tmall strategy, for example. Right. So I think it's going to really depend, but I say, always keep yourself sort of accountable to a measurable ROI, but also sort of to all the stakeholders in these decisions around technology to kind of keep them informed and abreast of how things are developing, because as we know with data analytics technology, it might take time, and it usually does, for it to really kind of to take hold and to see the lift that you want to. So kind of coaching those stakeholders along the way, I think, is really important. I feel like I'm talking as much about the sort of people side of
right.
technology
right.
as I am about the technology itself, and that's on purpose, because I think they're equally important. This is a data processor too. I'm pointing to my head.
So what do you think the outlook is for, I think designers might want to close their ears for this part out there if you're listening,
Be kind.
Will AI replace human designers? There's a lot of talk about AI replacing a lot of different jobs. What about designers? Because, we spent the whole part of this conversation where we're finding that machine learning and AI can predict trends. And we're just scratching the surface. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Maybe I'm an idealist, but I do not think that they will. In the way that I envision it, it's going to enable the designer and the creative and the consumer to collaborate in a way that we haven't really even envisioned yet. So that's kind of how I see it. I think it's just going to help people access sort of, new ideas and bring them to market in a different way. And I think we're kind of already moving in that direction, because a lot of brands are really taking more input from their shoppers. But I see a universe in which there's just a closer partnership, and it's, more on sort of even playing field.
So do you think designers 5 years from now will have completely different skill sets coming into it? Like when you have some of the major luxury houses hiring a new creative director, mm-hmm. Again, 5 years from now, will that creative director have, like I said, completely different skill sets where perhaps there was data? They're not only, creative right brain, but they're also left brain thinkers, and they grew through some aspect of understanding what data is and how to apply it to the business that they're in.
I think that it is important to have some, the business sensibility, but I also think you're going to see even more rigor and education around sustainability, which obviously means many, many different things. So I think that, yes, and I know fashion education has been evolving a lot over the past years. So I think, yes, but I think the, important thing is to have that collaboration, like I mentioned before, with the Gucci creative team and the merchant team, that they really work together, where the creatives, they're out there, they're capturing all these interesting ideas and then sort of bringing that together and working side by side with the merchants to bring commercially viable products to market. And I know there's some luxury houses that wouldn't completely agree with what I just said, but I think this is the world in which we're in, if not going to be in. So, that's sort of where I think the education needs to evolve.
So you were talking about sustainability as part of StyleSage. Does that come up often when you're tracking other brands?
Yeah, it's coming up. In the last 6 months, much more. And it's just really understanding how, the verbiage around it. What does it mean? Does it mean materials? Does it mean where it's made? There's so many different ways it's kind of defined. And I think one of the things that we're working on is how we're going to sort of build out sort of categorization around that so it's clear, so the merchants will understand, sustainability by this definition. So I think it's really important. It's becoming for some places it's built into their entire product strategy. For others, it's sort of more of a premium or different kind of collection. So each retailer is approaching it differently. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that evolves. But yes, we're definitely looking at the data behind that, and we're going to do some really interesting reporting on it in the next few months.
Can't wait is it going to be shared publicly?
Yes, it will be. We do some of these in-depth reports from time to time, and this is one we've been working on for a while. It's pretty complex, but I'm pretty excited about it too.
Oh, wow. I think our audience will have to look out for that. So the final question, which is the final question I give to all my guests, is the luxury item question. After all, that's the name of the podcast. So if you were stranded on a desert island, what single luxury item would you want to have with you? And it can't be any form of transportation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to circumvent the transportation thing with my iPhone because I think that would be the ultimate luxury item. I could get my NetJet or I could charter the private jet to pick me up, maybe order some Seamless.
Are you gaming the system here?
I'm
going to have to change these questions, and there's no wireless connection where you are.
If not that, then probably some heavy duty sunscreen so I don't get, but I definitely would go for the phone because Apple is the ultimate luxury product.
Ultimate luxury brand. Interesting. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. You've been a great guest.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. And talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you. And that's it for another episode of The Luxury Item. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Thank you so much for listening. You can subscribe to The Luxury Item at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.